Hello and welcome to the video. This is a quick video for all of you that have been in touch during my existing modern helicopter series to talk about quadcopters and helicopters. Lots of us out there have been flying quadcopters for a long time, not as many with helicopters. This is still quite an exotic beast. However, they are very, very close cousins in terms of flying. So for all of you that have been asking about this, I thought I'd make a quick video. Let's start with our friend, the quadcopter. Now, the quadcopter is fixed pitch, so it means that to gain altitude or to gain speed, you increase the throttle, increases the speed of the props, and away you go. But to fall in the air or to descend, then you just reduce the throttle. And essentially, the quadcopter falls to the ground as the props produce less and less lift and gravity takes effect. Now this is also the same for fixed pitch helis. The other thing that is wildly different is the way that yaw is handled on a quad. Yaw is handled by the torque that's created by the motors and by speeding up individual sets of motors, because they're all turning in different directions, clockwise and counterclockwise. It uses the torque from the motor and the prop to actually turn the model around. But if we grab the helicopter and look at the helicopter, there are some pretty big differences. First and foremost here is the fact that a helicopter, most modern helicopters are going to be variable pitch, as we've already talked about in the series. So this means as you increase the throttle, you're not necessarily just increasing the speed of the rotors. You're also actually dynamically changing the pitch of the blades, and that provides a very, very different feel. Hover point on these things is normally set up, irrespective of the head speed or the setup, to be just over about 50% throttle. So whereas with a quad there's some hover point, for a powerful quad it'll be about, I don't know, quarter throttle. For a very lazy quad it'll be about 50% throttle. With a helicopter, it'll always be about 50% throttle, because that is the point at which the blades have a slight positive pitch and the head speed is enough to produce the lift to hold it in the air. Then from 50% up, things get very exciting because the pitch is piled onto the head, and depending on what mode you're in, you might either then also increase the speed of the blades as well. And that means that ascents are quite aggressive. But also descents are too. We do have negative pitch on helicopters that allow it to fly upside down. But also it means that when you go below 50% throttle, rather than gravity doing the work to land the quadcopter, the helicopter is actually powering itself down, flying downwards to land. But a quadcopter is a fantastic way to learn to fly a helicopter, because the controls are the same in the way that you manage the throttle, the way that you manage the kind of the lift and movement around. So it's a great way to learn. I would recommend that if you want to get into helicopters, probably buy yourself a little Whoop style quadcopter and learn to fly that first. Personally, I was having lots of problems with things like nose in, line of sight hovering with my helicopter, and the way I fixed that back in the day was get one of the very early Hubsan indoor flying quad things, and actually just spent an entire winter, battery after battery, learning to nose in hover. And then when it came to spring and I got the helicopters back out, you know what, I could do it. But there are a couple of big differences if you are coming from a quadcopter to a helicopter. The first is that when you yaw on a quadcopter versus when you yaw on a helicopter. On a helicopter, the yaw feels much more locked in, very responsive. It's not relying on the counter rotation of the torque for the motors. It actually has the little prop at the back. So that means that when you yaw about, this little prop is doing the work for you, and it can be quite surprising how quickly these things can whip around. So that's the first thing that you'll spot as a quad pilot coming to helis. The next one is it might feel like you have much more direct control. Depends on the kind of heli pilot that you are. If you regularly use angle or horizon mode or something on a quadcopter, Flying with a helicopter is going to feel more like race mode. It's going to feel very responsive and very, very locked in. It can be useful to add extra expo on the radio for the first couple of flights, just while you're getting used to everything. The other thing as well is that obviously descents are now powered. When you go below 50% throttle, the head is still whirring away, but you have negative pitch, so it will actively fly downwards. So if you just drop the throttle to 10%, to drop it down to the ground and expect it to drop relatively gently like a quadcopter does, you're going to have a surprise on your hands, because the helicopter will be flying down into the ground. So you have to kind of land it at about 45% throttle for it to kiss the ground gently. The other thing as well is that you'll notice that the flight times are longer. We have a much bigger blade area, spinning more slowly to produce the lift. So this little 650 milliamp hour battery in this thing, even though it's the weight of a reasonable sized quad, you'll get a really long flight time. So be prepared for that as well. And the other thing, of course, is you'll notice coming from a quad to a helicopter, I would recommend practice your line of sight flying, but orientation is easy with a helicopter. You can see at a glance exactly which way it's pointing, which is a lot harder to do if you're in a quad. Moving from helicopters to quads, it's a piece of cake. If you can fly a helicopter, you can fly a quadcopter or a multi-rotor. That's what I did, and that's why when I came to these things as a helicopter pilot, it was just so easy. The yaw will feel more smushy. The fact that you don't have negative pitch, it's like a fixed pitch helicopter, will feel a bit mushy as well. But if you can fly a heli and you fancy having to go at quads, it'll be a piece of cake. But it also means that if you're a heli pilot and you're having trouble with something like nose in flying, getting yourself a little indoor quadcopter, something like a tiny whoop or a whoop, and flying around and practicing that stuff with the radio is going to let you crack that particular thing that you're struggling with without damaging and crashing helis all the time. Last point to just reinforce is the fact that if you're a heli pilot, you will be used to minimum kind of repairs when you do a hard landing or you hit a branch or whatever. Helicopters are not like that. I would always recommend, if you are playing or thinking of doing stuff with helicopters, make sure that you can fly a quadcopter first. If you can, when you come into heliland, it'll save yourself a lot of time and money. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.